Hello, hello. This is Alex Burkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, I'm chatting with Benyamin Elias. Benyamin is the VP of Growth at Podia, and before that acted as Director of Growth Marketing at ActiveCampaign. In this conversation, we cover contrarian leadership and management principles. We talk about why process is often overrated, it feels safe, but it's often counterproductive, as well as how to audit and unwind bloated processes once they already exist in your company. We talk about why your team is capable of so much more than they think, and how to disrupt limiting beliefs, and how to set great goals and projects. And also, we talk about how content marketers should be approaching their career growth. You'll love this conversation. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Benyamin Elias. I wanted to start with something ephemeral and recent that I saw. Like there was this Twitter thread, I think it was Amanda Natividad, about like the number one marketing book, content marketing book that you would recommend.
Sure.
And you had a very strongly worded take that it was How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp. And I think you said you had bought that for like everybody on your team. Yep. And it should be required reading for everybody in marketing. And you didn't expound on that. So I have to ask you now, like, I haven't read the book. What am I missing?
Oh man, it's so good. I have it on my shelf over there. It's here. It's these like little horizontal red, blue ones. There's How Brands Grow and there's How Brands Grow Part 2. And then there are a couple of other books that came out of the same research institute. And what is interesting about these books is that they really are looking at real numbers. This is really how marketing or markets work and how brands grow in markets. A lot of what we hear in marketing is perspective or philosophy, or sometimes even moralizing about things like customer retention or trust or brand or all these types of things that are vague words that are hard to quantify, that mean different things to different people. And what Byron Sharp does is he looks at the last 70 years of marketing research and research on markets and says, actually, if you look at how markets behave and how brands operate in markets, there's a relatively small number of things that have a real effect on growth or that correlate to growth. And it is counter to a lot of what modern marketers talk about in a couple of specific ways. One is that Byron Sharp is not a big fan of differentiation relative to the general population of marketers. He does not say, as sometimes he's quoted as saying, that it is not important at all, but he does say that you can't really differentiate that much with just your marketing. You have to have product line differentiation, or you target different segments of a market with your different products. And then when you are actually doing your marketing, you go for distinctiveness. You want to have distinctive assets, whether that be brand design, logo, fonts, tagline, those types of things. And some of this is for like huge companies like the Coca-Colas of the world. Mm-hmm. But you can still use the principles at a smaller scale so that you are easy to recognize and easy to remember, and that you come to mind at the moment when someone is making a decision. The simplest example that I think or I use all the time is, think of a Corona ad. And where are you in a Corona ad? You're on a beach. Every single time. Mm-hmm. If you're going to go to the beach, you're going to bring some beers. What beer are you going to pick? You're going to hopefully pick Corona. That's what Corona is going for. They want to build mental availability for that category entry point. Similarly, what do you put in a Corona?
Lime.
You put a lime. Why? Do you put a lime in other beers? I mean, I'm sure that there is someone knows the whole history of putting fruits in beers, but we don't put fruit that often. Sometimes you see like an orange and a blue moon or whatever, but you don't put stuff in commercially mass-produced beers all that often. But you do in Corona. Why? Again, like it appears in all the advertising. So it's those types of takes. He talks about reach, because you have to have a massive amount of reach, and he has a lot of numbers to back this up. You have to have a massive amount of reach in order to build the type of availability that you're looking for different categories or category entry points. And there are a lot of reasons that someone enters a purchase decision, and that's what you're trying to do for Byron Sharp, is when someone enters a purchase decision, you want to be in their consideration set already. And then it's just, you have to have them choose you over the other 2 to 3 things that are in their consideration set. I used to think about this a lot when I was at ActiveCampaign, because if you ask people what they use for email marketing, or, if someone asks you what you do at Thanksgiving, you have to say email marketing. Okay, what's that? It's like, oh, well, have you heard of MailChimp? Because MailChimp had massive mental availability for the category. And they also really took the distinctiveness advice to heart in a lot of ways that made them easy to remember. When I remember the first time I was reading How Brands Grow, which I think it was in 2017, I thought, this is MailChimp. They just did all of this. Like, they have their mascot, the Freddy the Chimp. They had their visual design that for a little while was blue, and then they did this like wild yellow thing that everyone started to copy, but they were copying it for the wrong reasons, right? Like MailChimp is trying to be distinctive and memorable, and then as soon as everyone else does it, it's like, well, it's not that the design was special, it's that it was different and trying to be connected to MailChimp specifically. I don't know that I would necessarily continue to champion MailChimp in the last few years as an example of this stuff, because they went down a sort of different path. But it applies to purchase decisions because it's how people make purchase decisions. And that, I think, is what that book is great at, is it cuts through so much of the other stuff, so much of the personalization that we talk about. It's not that it's not at all important, but it's much less important than people say that it is. And it has diminishing returns in terms of not necessarily ROI, but in terms of profit, in terms of growth. ROI is always going to be higher on a smaller scale because it's a lot easier to have a multiple of a small number. But we're not trying to have multiples of small numbers. We're trying to have big numbers.
It's interesting on a meta level that you mentioned a general marketing book for content marketing. You didn't say a specific content marketing book. So that's interesting because I assume these lessons can apply to content marketing in some concrete way.
They can apply to, I think, every form of marketing. And I think some of the challenge that I see in content marketing is that people get very attached to doing content instead of what is the largest impact that I can have on the business. My tool might be content, so I might be using content as the hammer to hammer that nail, but people will get attached to the playbook that is content marketing, of this keyword research, or of mostly, honestly, keyword research, but sometimes customer stories and other stuff like that. Maybe being a media company or trying to be a publication. And it's not about any of those things. It's about, in the context of the business that you find yourself in and the way that that business grows, how can you use content to grow more effectively if you are a content marketer? If you are not attached to being a content marketer, then it's just, how does this business grow most effectively? And sometimes the answer is content, and sometimes it's not. And that's the advice that I give to people when they're thinking about growing their careers also, is you will grow more in your career if you run towards the hard, important problem in the business. There are degrees to that. There are some problems that are too hard for an individual, or are not appropriate for your expertise in the area. Like, if I'm at a company with a billing system that makes it very hard to change things, I know nothing about how to fix that, and I can't run towards that problem. But it's a powerful thing to be able to say, I am focused on the most important growth lever of the business versus I made blog traffic go up X%.
That requires that you sort of like detach from your identity in a way. Yes. And this is interesting because I think a lot of people have some sense of like ideological purity with regards to what they do. You know, you see email marketers constantly quote that old stat from like 2006. It's like, you know, right, for every dollar you put into email, you get $42 back. And like content marketers, like, or if you don't have a blog, like, you know, what are you doing? Like, it's like what you said, like Maslow's hammer, you're constantly looking for a nail if that's the one tool you have. And I think like that comes from the incentives of really the thought leaders in the space, because if you're a thought leader, if you're a consultant, if you're a speaker, you are incentivized to repeat the same message and evangelize that message. You know, so it's like if dark social's your thing, if we had like a framework, like that would be a thing that we should repeat all. But really what's effective is what we say is like be fluid. It's like apply the right tool at the right time for the right purpose, and don't be too caught up on like any one thing. It's like thought leadership can be great. It's also a generic term. So it's like you got to define that. SEO content could be great. Like dark social can be great, but like not always. It's like not always the right answer. So it's like hard to divorce yourself from that thing that you think you are from the thing that's going to work best.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
The reason I reached out to you in the first place is because of this article that really resonated with me. And you, on your Substack, which is amazing, you speak often of, I would say, like leadership. And before we started rolling, you mentioned kind of like your ideas on marketing being contrarian, but they shouldn't be. That's actually the takeaway that I get from a lot of the content that you write, which is like, I agree heavily. Not a lot of people agree, but I'm like, this actually makes the most sense. So the article that really caught my attention was your team is wrong about what it can get done. That was really inspiring to me. So I want to talk about this because I think it's like a novel or unrepresentative kind of management and leadership style, especially for like early stage or like scale ups. So it's like, if we could summarize and maybe you can like add some detail here. It's kind of like scope out huge projects like that make people excited, big goals, and then support the team, but get out of their way, right? When it comes to the creative execution, like there's a lot of wiggle room, but it's really just setting these markers that appear almost like impossible or like infeasible. But it's like somehow when you set those, people figure out a way.
Yeah, totally. Who on a team is going to come up with the big idea? That's a question that I think about, because I would like to encourage my team to come up with these ideas, but often people are incentivized by the work that they do daily or the things that they are closest to. And as a result, they're less likely to think across their different functions and across other members of the team or other departments to coordinate the complexity of something that really gets you to what you are trying to accomplish. So when I think about, the title of that is your team is wrong about what they can get done. And they are. Like every time I bring up a big project like this, less so recently because we've done a few of them and we've experienced it not being as painful as we thought. But when I bring up these things, the response is, and I say this in the article, swallows nervously, okay. And why is that? Like, why, when you hear in the example that I used, we're going to 5x our production of these free tools and templates in the next 6 weeks, why is that terrifying? And it's a few reasons. One is that people don't focus on just the thing that you said. They think about all of the other work that they do. Any really big project has 1 to 3 things that really have to go right for it to be successful. And you can do just those 1 to 3 things and do pretty well if it's the right project for you and for the business. But when you bring it to your team, they don't focus on just the 1 to 3 things. They think about all the things that they would love to do or how they would do it cool. Or how they would do it cool is, by the way, grammar that I recommend using. How they would do it cool, how they can bring in all of the work that they like to do or that's familiar to them. They tend to not let go of the other tasks that they're doing, whether or not those tasks are the highest value tasks. And they also tend to not think of how the team overall can be accomplishing something together. They tend to think, oh, that's a huge project. That would take me weeks, months, years to do on my own, but you're not doing it on your own. And it's the manager's job to recognize that and to coordinate their pieces or the team to some degree, or at least facilitate the coordination of the team to let them accomplish more than they could do individually. And the last piece of that is that they tend to not see process improvements that will happen. So when you actually start working on things, in this case, it was a production timeline, and those are relatively linear, which is helpful. You just get more efficient at them. And it's not until you set out to do them at a scale that you have not done before that you are forcing yourself to become more effective at them. When I say we're going to increase our tools and templates production by 5 times in the next 6 weeks, the limiting factors on that have not been that the team can't produce that number of things. It's that we have to get them up onto the site. We got to get the design assets. We got to get the automations in place. We got to work with all these other people to make sure that we can actually launch the stuff. And when you're just saying like, hey, every so often, can I get this one thing up there? No one builds you into their process. When you say, we will be producing 5x what we are currently producing every single week, suddenly they have to pay attention to that, and you have much more grounds internally to get the resources that you need. There are limits to when you can and can't do this, but we're doing the same thing at Podia right now, where last year we launched fellowships. So our audience is individual creators, and individual creators are self-funded for the most part. They are paying for stuff out of their pocket, and giving them, $2,000 is a huge amount of money, or could be a huge amount of money to that type of person. So we launched these fellowships. We tag on all these other campaigns to them. They're an amazing way to give to the community while also like making a big deal out of it, celebrating the winners. We have other creators chip in their courses as runner-up prizes. We've had side contests where people post on social media, and we've got hundreds of people to post. And over 1,000 people spend an hour filling out the application. When you hear that and you're like, well, I can't get 1,000 people to spend an hour doing anything. Are you kidding me? That's incredible. That's such an incredible focusing tool for other campaigns that we run. This year, we're doing a year of them. We're doing every single month, we're running a fellowship. And when the team hears that at first, they're like, we got to do that every 4.5 weeks for a year. But no, you don't really, because you set up a lot of the infrastructure in the first one, and we've done it 3 times already, so we already know how some of it runs. You set up a lot of it the first time, it runs more effectively the second time. The third time, you start to layer in new stuff, and there's new opportunities. Maybe you can get sponsorships and someone else to pay the prize money. Maybe you can work more closely with some of the larger creators to spread the reach. Maybe you make it part of a different campaign you're doing. When we launch X feature, say something related to our website builder, you actually join this fellowship by building something in the website builder and submitting it for feedback or review. Like, now we're getting people involved in the product in a different way. Everything is sort of connected differently. And it really is not that much work for the team, but it's a great big headline that lets us coordinate our campaigns better. So that's sort of, I think that project may even have been the genesis of thinking about that post. When you set the big goals, you give people the freedom to organize towards them. It's really hard for someone in a team that is looking at their specific function to look across everything and come up with a big goal that makes sense, that they feel comfortable advocating for, because there are a lot of things that you can do, and you just have to decide. The manager is in a position where it's easier for them to just decide or just advocate, and that makes it easier for their team to make other decisions, and hopefully in the future come up with those big decisions also. So when it came to that templates project, I said to the team, you can do this because of these things. They didn't believe me at first, but then they hit the target in 4 weeks instead of 6, and no one was working like crazy hard to do it. I also was very clear, I am not solving these problems for you. I'll be in the call if you have questions, but just as often I'm going to turn the questions back to you. And every so often, especially in the first few calls, they would wink, wink, nudge, be like, does that sound okay? I was like, I'm not answering that question. You decide. I didn't say you have to have 5x the output next week. I said 6 weeks from now. So you can ladder into that. You can do anything you want to do to reach that goal. I think it's a completely achievable goal. And again, they did achieve it in just the 4 weeks. But you give people the freedom to make decisions about the work that they're closer to than you are. And you make sure that it's building towards something that is going to be valuable to the business as a whole.
I think one reason I love this so much is I love, everybody has limiting beliefs, myself included. And I love that you actually kind of alluded to this and how you talked about it when you said like, hey, we're going to hit this. And like, people don't believe you at first. What you're doing is you're implicitly saying like, I believe in your potential. Like, I believe you're capable of so much more than you think you are. And I think a lot of managers accidentally kind of like imbue like the oppression of low expectations because they think linearly and like in reasonable goals, and they're implicitly saying like, I don't think you're capable of doing more than this. And I think like it's not even like the top performers, it's like every performer really wants to be stretched at the end of the day. Like they want to like show, you know, what they're capable of, and when they look back at those things, they start to think of themselves differently and say like, oh shit, like I thought this was impossible, but I did it. Therefore, like, what else can I do? And you start to like imbue the culture with this sense of possibility as opposed to like lowered expectations. Hey, let's do the reasonable stuff. And then you end up in this mediocre middle. So it's like this psychological shift that you you ingrain in the company almost as well, just by like saying, I believe in you.
And I'm a big psychology guy. That's my major. That's like what half my books on my 5 bookshelves are. And it is really something that I think about a lot when it comes to management. What are you training people to do? Like, how are you influencing their behavior unintentionally in your interactions with them? Because if people come to you with questions and you answer the questions every time, you are training them to not think for themselves. You have to be careful, as I've done this poorly in the past, where people will come with questions and I would not answer the questions and they would get angry at me because why are you being an ass? But so you can overdo it. But at the same time, like if someone asks me a question, I will almost always ask at least, how have you been thinking about this so far? Like you have this question, some line of thought has led you to this question. And even to answer the question well, I probably need to know what that line of thought is. And then we can have a conversation about that.
That's also training autonomy and ingenuity on their parts as well, as opposed to accepting like whatever else people tell them.
If I'm the person who solves problems for my team, they're not going to solve problems for themselves. I have to create a culture that everyone on the team solves problems. Otherwise, I have to do everything. And that sounds like a lot of hard work, in addition to not being the best thing for the company.
I was going to ask a question around like other contrarian leadership lessons you've learned, but I have a couple more examples actually from your Substack. Another one that I love that I think actually a lot of people, I don't know if they would agree with this. If they thought about it for longer than a little bit, they would. But I hear a lot of people talk about process. And like if you're in an interview, like the best thing you can say is like, oh yeah, I've got a process by which I do this work, whether you're interviewing for a CRO position or a product management position, whatever. You wrote a piece debunking the idea that everything needs to be a process. So I think management often creates processes to solve for like one-off mistakes that a team made. And then that kind of hamstrings like everybody else. And like, it just causes all this red tape and bottlenecks. And really you just needed to solve that like acute problem, not like create like this advantage like over the whole thing. So one thing that you said in the piece was the process is safety, right? Like nobody's going to argue against like building a process. It just sounds like the right thing to do. It sounds like the mature, responsible thing to create a process. I don't know if I have a question on that. just want you to expound on that one.
Totally.
Yeah.
What's a process accomplish? Like, what are you trying to accomplish when you implement a process? And I think that's a really important question, because if you really think about it, like the first answer that people will give is, oh, well, we had this problem and we want to avoid this problem. Or probably that's the most common one. Or, oh, we want to make sure that we, produce this thing in the way that it should be produced. But really, if you dig into that, the answer is it is causing me distress that we don't have a process for some reason, because I am having to chase down individual people, or I have to go try to get feedback on stuff, or maybe something did go wrong, but then we have to think about what's the appropriate way to address that and stop it from going wrong in the future. And that is not a good reason to make a process. And that's sort of uncomfortable because, I don't want people to be having a bad time at work. And if things are on fire, I would prefer them to not be on fire, and we should figure out a way to have them not be on fire. But our customers don't care if we are stressed about things. So I want to create an environment that's not crazy stressful. And it's not actually. And I almost commented in the last one where we work on these huge projects and they feel like less work than not doing them because of how well coordinated we are. But the customer doesn't care. Like the end user doesn't care. They care that the end result is really high quality. And that's what we're trying to build for. If a process helps with that, that's great. And if the thing holding back the result is our lack of coordination, then we should create a process for it. But almost never would I say create a process for something that you've only done once. Absolutely never would I say create a process for something that you've never done, but that happens all the time, because it will be wrong. It's going to be the wrong process. If you haven't tried to solve the problem in a non-scalable way, you don't know how to solve the problem yet, even if you have an idea of how it works.
There's so
how
much
are you
unexpected
going to scale it?
Problems that come up when you try to do that. I've tried to do that with new services that we launched at Omniscient, and it's like there's always 10 things we didn't predict, and there's like 2 things that are easier than we thought they would be.
And it's a really uncomfortable thing to start something without knowing how it's going to go. If you have a new service line or a new product or anything really, like you should try to sell it first before you do anything else, probably, because you're going to learn so much. I mean, you could do like customer research and actually talk to people, and there are ways to de-risk it. But you have to get in the weeds at some point. You have to get real meaningful market feedback or whatever the context market means in the context that you're operating. Maybe that's internal to the company or something else. You have to actually try to execute the thing or test the meaningful core component of it before you try to put all of these different steps in place, because the steps are going to miss things. And it's not until you actually try to do it that you realize, oh, well, we had a very clear set of steps, but it didn't help us get what we needed from the design team. It didn't help us get what we needed from our developers. And we kept missing deadlines. And that's something that I ask people sometimes when they ask about process. How's your process working? Are you consistently shipping the quality of work that you want? Because when they're talking to me about it, it's always that they had some sort of problem. I can't get design, or I'm trying to build buy-in for content or this other thing. Your process isn't working, right? Like that's what that means, but they get very attached to the process aspect of it. So I think about systems much more than I think about processes. And a system is about and this is pedantic in some sense to talk about what words mean. But when I think about systems, I think, how are the different forces in an organization connected? How do they influence each other? And how can you coordinate those influences towards the objective that you want to build? And to understand a system is a thing that you don't necessarily have to build. You build your understanding of the system, but the system exists whether you build it or not. So you can understand how the system works and you can try to shape it towards the thing that you want to do. But if you've put in the work to understand how your company operates, how your market operates, how what your customers think, you can test it once and see how it goes from there. You can also build the process iteratively, like we did with 5x our tools and templates output. They didn't necessarily say, this is our exact set of steps, but they did say, here's a few things that have to happen at some point. We have to get some assets from design. We have to get it up on the website. We have to actually make the thing. We have to get the automation in place. All right, let's do that. And then next week, let's do it twice. And the next week we'll do it 3 times. The next week we did it 5 times. Oh, we're done. This is our process now. And when it develops organically like that, there's a quote from, I'm going to get it wrong now, but John Gall from the book Systemantics. I think I might even quote it in that article. A complex process that works has always evolved from a simple system that works. You can never build a complex process from scratch. You have to start over with a simple working system. And that's true. It starts simple and then it expands to accommodate the needs of the work that you're doing.
It feels kind of bureaucratic in a way because it's hard to like unwind processes and steps that you've built into the system. So I always think about like, what's the minimum viable process, which is sort of like, it goes back to the question about what the process is for, which to me is usually about like quality control and making sure that like you kind of identify the areas that you can fail and the areas that you can't fail, and you build more robust processes for the areas that you can't fail. Otherwise it would be catastrophic. Yeah. And the areas that you can, you kind of like leave that more open to interpretation and like have less red tape in those areas. So I found content teams, if we get concrete on this thing, content teams love process. There's a lot of bloated activities and wasted activities, in my opinion, all the way from like spending months creating a buyer persona based on like your assumptions. And, those things might not exist once you start actually producing content. But like one of the saddest things I see is like large corporations who have all the potential in the world, yet their process hamstrings them where they can only write like 2 articles a week or something like that. And if they just did a growth model, they would see, all right, if we publish 10 articles a week, like we have this domain rating that's going to allow us, it's like fly by the rest of the people. But they have so many rounds of review and approval. And it's like, you can eliminate all the typos, but like, what if you just let the typos be? Probably not going to make a difference. And then you did 10 articles a week and actually your ROI looked like this. So it's like, what's that minimum viable process? And like, I don't know. I do feel like those bigger projects also help you question those assumptions. It's like, what do we need and what is not essential?
Yeah, minimum viable process is exactly how I think about it also. Sometimes I talk about this and people are like, oh, he worships chaos. It's like, no, I hate chaos the same way everyone else does. But maybe I see some things as chaos and some things as not chaos. We have processes for how we QA our emails so that stuff doesn't go out without the wrong links in it, right? Like that's stuff that we have that we sent some emails that had the wrong links in them, and then we never made that mistake again. We have processes for how we communicate bugs to developers, right? Like this is things that you need processes for when they come up, but you don't have to build those until they come up, until you can build around them. With the typos thing is funny. I remember a conversation I had early in my time at ActiveCampaign where a coworker mentioned, oh, what exactly happened? I mean, I basically said I'm okay publishing something if it has a typo in it, because that's not like what the value of the piece is.
Yeah, no one notices.
And he was like, you would publish it with a typo? It's like, yeah, man. Like, think about the person that, if you think the person you respect most in the world who writes maybe the content creator you respect,
would you
most,
still read F. Scott Fitzgerald if there was a typo in it?
Right.
100%.
Like, it doesn't change the quality of the actual message. And you don't want it to be riddled with typos, and you don't want it to like read like you're stupid, but if a typo slips through, that's not the thing that is going to make or break the piece.
And it's funny too, because if you actually look at like what's kind of like, I mean, trends happen all the time, and like what works in marketing changes a lot. But if you look at the last couple of years, I feel like imperfection in like video quality, like people just doing like quick, like walk and talk videos on LinkedIn and whatnot, like without all the polish and the editorial and all of that stuff, it's actually been more effective as opposed to less effective. So it's like those things that you thought were weaknesses could actually be strengths, but you don't know until you try.
It's funny because sometimes the people who are really good at adding the polish will focus on that more than the thing that makes a piece successful. If you're thinking about content, the big idea of the content is what makes it successful. I think in terms of a copywriter, because that's some of my background, what's the offer? You're selling something always. It can be an idea. The offer makes or breaks the copy. It's like the offer and the market are the number one and two things, and everything else sort of doesn't matter as much. And even if that stuff is perfect, you're not going to overcome a bad offer and a bad market. The same thing applies to content. If you have a great message for the person who needs to hear it, no one cares if you're not shooting 4K video.
Right.
Also, it's pretty easy to shoot 4K video now, comparatively.
Yeah, the tools are getting better.
Yeah.
So if you come into a new company or a new program, and let's say there's legacy systems and processes in place, like for a content organization, you know, like there's tons of editorial review, there's tons of upfront research that is almost unnecessary. Or let's not even go specific. Like, let's say like you've just got a process that seems to be bottlenecked, where you're not producing what you should be, the ROI is not there. Like, how do you come in and audit that and figure out what's important and what's not? And like, how do you actually unwind some of those systems if they're not actually helpful? Because I feel like that's like a little bit of a culture shock.
It is. And what a hard situation to be in. I always ask this question of people on the team. Like, I want to talk to everyone on the team. I want to ask them, what should we be doing? If we could do anything, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you want us to do that we're not doing? And some people will have an answer like, oh, I really wish we had better images or something, right? And then some people will be like, we should rethink our entire program from scratch. And if that sentiment is there, I want to work with that sentiment. So, and it exists if the process is bad somewhere, right? Like someone on the team has thought that before. Can you get them to trust you enough to actually get it out of them? That's another question. But you want to understand where that sentiment exists and who has it and who is thinking that way, because those are probably the people you want to build around. And then, as much as possible, you want to give them the freedom to work on some version of the thing that they talked about, or something that is conceptually similar. If they give an example that you don't think is right for the business, but it's like big and interesting and targeting the I should really work with a specific example. It'd be a lot better. They want to put together some like huge campaign, some ebook, And you're like, well, I don't think we need to do an ebook, but really what I'm hearing from them is that they want to work on something big that's not constrained to week to week production, or they want to have a big launch for something. They want to get other people involved in other teams. If I can create a project that has those elements that I think is a better fit for the business and have them work on it, they're still going to be excited about it. And that's how I do think about it. People will gravitate towards a big idea or a big win in a way that they will not gravitate towards an incremental improvement. The incremental improvement is important, but you can't sell an incremental improvement in the same way most of the time. So you have to sell the big win, the big project, and use it to drive the incremental improvement. We're trying to do this with the year of fellowships thing that I mentioned, where the huge headline and what creators care about is we're doing a fellowship every single month. And it's going to have all these other, I almost said ancillary, which is, cut some jargon out. Yeah, that's okay. You have all these other prizes, and you have all these other opportunities to win and opportunities to get featured and these types of things. But we're going to do that every single month. And that's a huge headline, and it's great for the team. We feel very excited to be working on it. It's great for the rest of the company. They are like, wow, marketing is doing a cool thing. And we can still use it to drive the feature adoption we want to drive people to the educational material we want them to look at in January, to send people to a customer survey and get them to actually fill it out in the depth that we want. We have to use the big moments to drive the incremental improvement. And if I'm coming into a team, I'm looking for what's the biggest moment that I can create that weakens the hold of bureaucracy. It may not be that we can come in and take everything by storm and whatever it is, run a massive conference, if I thought that was the thing to do. But maybe it is the ebook. Maybe that is what the team needs to work on. Maybe they need to work on not just pumping out content every week. Or maybe it's something bigger than that. What can I get people excited about? Because if I can get them excited about something, I can start to move them away from the old systems that I don't think are effective. And that's a lot better, I think, than saying, no, you're wrong and do it my way. It's that similar idea of like, if you can get people invested in the idea for themselves and thinking about it for themselves, then they will actually think about it. Then they will actually solve the problems. Then they will actually figure out how to make it work, versus me trying to impose some process that, again, like I can't impose a process. I'm not smart enough to impose a process. And I don't think anyone is over a 20-person team that I'm just seeing for the first time, but they can build it themselves if you give them the motivation to do it.
That sparking excitement with sometimes big goals is a very interesting point. Something that I've learned is effective in the sales process as well. A lot of people who are bought into content just need like a big vision that's worthwhile to, it gets them out of bed in the morning, and it's actually moving the needle, as opposed to just saying like, oh yeah, we'll write this blog post. This is like the tried and true format. It's like, no, you're here. Here's where you could be, and like selling that vision. Yeah. And then all of the pieces kind of come into place later. But even in selling internally, of course, as well with management, it's kind of like selling the vision internally as well. Excitement is underrated, I would say.
It's what gets people to do things. You can only like use a stick or even a carrot, really, to motivate people for a limited amount of time. They will eventually do it because they want to do it. You dangling the carrot makes them resent the carrot. You hitting them with a stick makes them hate you.
Yep.
They have to move because they want to move at some point.
So if we could shift to career stuff, I'm interested in hearing, because you came up through content marketing. Now you're running growth marketing, broader function. So I'm curious, in your personal journey, like in what ways did you need to level up from going from maybe like a content IC to a manager, and then manager to a broader function, like from content to growth? What were the mindset shifts, skill shifts, anything that you needed to do to take on those new roles?
Yeah. I would think in terms of scope of influence. That's how I think about career growth. Who are you influencing within the company? And maybe it's actually helpful to hear a little bit about the overall trajectory of my career, just so lay it out in 60 seconds. I'm not going to get it in 60 seconds, but under 2 minutes, hopefully. So I graduated from college with a degree in psychology. I had always intended to go the academic route and go college, grad school, PhD, professor, never leave academia. But instead, I did some research in college, realized that actually running 100 participants through the same survey in a lab is the least interesting thing, I think, in the universe, and wanted to do something more practical that moved faster, and was like, well, marketing is sort of applied psychology. And it sort of is. I had no skills that anyone would pay me for. So I took any work that I could get my hands on. I did a cold calling internship with a small SaaS company at the same time as I did a PR social internship with a nonprofit. I took on any freelance work that I could convince someone that I was able to do. And then finally, I landed an internship that lasted about a month at a marketing agency before they hired me full-time to do content marketing. And when they did that, I said, what's content marketing? I had no idea. It was a completely new term to me. I thought writing was just a thing that people did in school. And as soon as I got in there, I wanted to learn everything I could about it. So I would do my client work as fast as I could. I'd be given 8 hours of client work to bill. I'd finish it in 4 hours, and I say it took me 6 hours, and I would spend the last 2 hours doing content work. I also started my own site that I think is still up, routineexcellence.com. It was about how can you use psychology to be more consistent in the gym? Because I would see people, I love lifting, I love psychology. I would see people make these mistakes that are really hurting themselves in terms of, you go in and you do the hardest workout you can imagine, and then the next day you feel absolutely terrible because your body's not used to it.
That's what I do.
Well, I mean, if you do it and you love it, then that's great. But if you're just getting started, you're like literally
sore for like 5 days, and you're like, I'm done with this. No way.
And it's a cycle with that. Like you go in, you're sore for 5 days, you don't want to go back. Then you go in again, you're sore for 5 days because your body never gets used to it. So you just continually punishing yourself.
Yeah, it's like trying to write a book in a day versus like 500 pages in the morning or something like that. Or it's 500 words in the morning.
Yeah. How can you make yourself feel good every time? You go to the gym? Which is in some ways, all of that is derivative of behavioral psychology, and it's still the stuff I use in management. Like, how can we feel good about the things that we're doing instead of, again, sticking people or using a carrot, because carrot would be a bribe in this context and not a reinforcement. But I started this site, and I scaled this site to, I think it was like 30,000 organic visitors a month, because I really wanted to learn end to end. I wanted to learn the analytics. I wanted to learn the email marketing and how to write landing pages and put up a website and distribute a blog post and work with other collaborators and all that kind of stuff. And I did all of that. I launched on Reddit. First day, 200,000 visitors from Reddit. It was absolutely terrifying.
Wow.
Most people were very positive. Some people were classic Redditors and very mean to me. Mm-hmm. And I was able to stick it out anyway. And I hit the top of our fitness probably 3 times, I think, over the course of building that. And at some point, I just lost interest. It wasn't what I wanted to think about all the time. But I learned a ton from that experience. And I used that to get the job at ActiveCampaign. Because at the time that I took the job at ActiveCampaign, my little website that I wrote on the side every so often was getting more traffic by like 3 times, almost 4 times than the ActiveCampaign blog was. And I basically was like, well, look, you can look at the stuff that I do in my job. You can look at my site, and I can do that for you. And they were like, yeah, you give it a shot. So I was there. I started as an IC. I started bringing in the keyword research and SEO in a way that we had not done it previously. Started working with influencers in the space, and just like the classic stuff, like getting quotes from them and having them share it and all that kind of stuff. The fundamentals that we talk about as content marketers. We started to see good results from that. I got promoted to manager. I got to hire someone. We kept seeing good results. I got to hire 3 more people. We, at that point, scaled from, we were at around 8,000 when I started. And at the time I hired up my team, we were at like 38,000. And in the 6 months after that, we went to 120,000 visitors a month from organic search. Then everything sort of changed. I took on the video team. At some point, I had PR for a little while. I had community. I had social. I influenced the site team. Like I had some degree of every function, more or less. Maybe not paid, but even then, they asked me to work on paid forecasts and things like that. Over the course of my time at ActiveCampaign, I wound up being promoted to director of content, and then as a better reflection of the various life cycle product marketing, forecasting, etc. work that I was doing, director of growth. Then I came over to Podia as director of growth, and then now VP of marketing over the entire marketing function. And the thing that I think about, going back to the scope of influence idea, is I need to get the most important thing done for the business. And that thing is not always the thing that I can execute myself. So I came in initially at ActiveCampaign. My mandate was, well, actually, it was write 3 blog posts a week, which I did begrudgingly. But really, I knew that it was get this result and grow this area of the business. After a while, it became clear that I actually needed to interact with other teams in a different way. I wanted to redo the website. Well, you can't redo the website on my own. So I need to be able to work well with the design team and the design team's leader and the site team and the site team leader, and get everyone on board with what we're doing in a way that, how do I get us to this result without managing my committee, without dragging out timelines forever? And that skill is the thing that started to serve me well, and is a lot of what we're talking about in some ways is like my answers to these challenges were, okay, well, how can we make these big projects? How can we make people excited about this? How can we appeal to the problems that people are experiencing in their day-to-day work and take the problems away for them through the work that I want done? Those are the skills that I had to develop over the course of my time at ActiveCampaign, and then coming into Podia as well. And you pick up all these different functional areas, and I'm a big reader and a big course taker and all that kind of stuff to learn all about the non-content areas of marketing. But coming into Podia, now we have a different type of communication. Now I have to work with our CTO, with our VP of support, people who are over departments that I know nothing about. And I didn't have to work that way at ActiveCampaign. And that's the next sort of challenge, I guess, is the coordination of the entire company through this leadership team towards the goals that we need to hit. So I think that's really what it is. It's like you got to run towards the hardest problem in the business and the highest impact area of the business, whether or not it is using the tool that you have come to know and love. And inevitably, that will require you working with other people and learning how to be effective and get things done through your work with other people, which is where a lot of people stall out, because it is a completely different skill set from functional expertise. And it's why I write my newsletter, is that no one teaches you how to do this type of stuff. I learned a lot of it through trial and error. I learned some of it by being a complete idiot. And I learned some of it by extracting what I could from stories of people who have been there or reading and that type of stuff.
Yeah, so that's super interesting. 2 things that I heard through this. The one is, I think, straightforward and people would agree with, which is like you just did shit. Like you started your own site. Like there was a testing, like a playground of sorts where you could like learn these lessons and actually apply them, as opposed to getting all wrapped up in analysis paralysis and taking tons of courses. You did stuff. And I think nobody would disagree with that. The other side is on, so you and I vibe on a lot of management lessons and like principles, I would say, but they're not common ones, and they're not things that I've read in leadership and management books. So it's something about your like mental operating system that causes you to back away, maybe like 1,000-foot view and say like, what actually matters, what doesn't matter, like how do I need to get there, like what are they actually asking for? And it's common to say like, first principles, like people use that phrase all the time, but it seems like you're thinking in first principles, as opposed to going out and, like I took a management course at Workato, like a program, and they teach you, how to like deliver effective one-on-ones and feedback and like all the basic ground level stuff. but it didn't teach me anything about what I am coming to learn through just experience and talking to people like yourself at Omniscient. It's a whole different thing to like come up with these ideas on, leadership on your own, and like those things like baking excitement in, making it fun, sustainable, like all of those things are lessons that you seem to have learned. I mean, on your own. Like it's like I haven't read about those things. They're not in, HBR and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the psychology background. So I recommended How Brands Grow. The other big book that I recommend 3 books. How Brands Grow, Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows, which is sort of a primer for the overall topic of systems thinking, but does help with that 1,000-foot view. I read that book and I was like, oh my God, this is how my brain has always just like interpreted information. And it's so nice to see it formalized and laid out in a way that makes it even easier to think through. So I highly recommend that book to people. Some people think it's dry. Some people think it's amazing. So you'll know who you are, I guess, when you open it. And then the third one is Don't Shoot the Dog by Karen Pryor. She is, this
I've read that one. Yeah. Well, I have a dog, and also I think Tim Ferriss recommended it because he's like, it's actually more broadly applicable than just dog training.
Yeah, I read this way back in high school. I have no idea how I heard about it initially, probably just through getting really interested in psychology. But she is a fascinating character who, she trained the horses, dolphins, etc. in Hawaii for a while. Then she was the Marine Commissioner for U.S. Wildlife something or other, a Senate appointed position. And then she was consultant for zoos and helped them like deliver more ethical treatment to animals. Like, how do you give an elephant medication? How do you get it to stand still for a shot? Well, they used to have to trank it up, and then now they would just train it to present its what do you call it? It's not a paw, it's not a hoof, it's foot, and put the shot into it. So she is all about behavioral psychology. She comes from a Skinner school of thought, and really all about how to use positive reinforcement to get the things that you want. In that book, she lays out 8 ways to change behavior. And I read that book all the time. I have tons of highlights in ReadWise that I review regularly because those are the 8 ways. Like, that's sort of it. And you can look at them and think about them, and there are a million different ways to apply those principles. But that's what I think about with management is I'm trying to get to a result with someone. And that result can be a result for the business. It can be a result for the career. It can be a result for the relationship. I have a lot of tools that can get me to that. I really just have to open my field of view to what all the tools are. Like, you could talk about management courses and it often is like, okay, well, you have your one-on-one. It's like, yeah, but there's a lot of stuff you can do in a one-on-one. When do you ask a question? When do you give an answer? When do you poke someone? When do you challenge someone? When you do challenge someone, how do you do it in a way that calls them to greatness and feels respectful to them?
Right, you can't just copy and paste this stuff. It's not
right.
If only it were that easy.
There are some principles that will apply across the board, and there are some things that are really specific to the person that you're talking to. And I read so much psychology because I'm fascinated by it as a topic. And, I have been forever, I think. But it is the tool set of how people interact with each other. And I think that's what it has served me well as I think about what are we trying to accomplish as managers and as teams, and how do we get to that?
I think if you're open to signals too, and you get reps over time, you start to learn some of this as you go. A lot of people start with best practices and then learn when they need to follow the rules and when they need to break the rules. So like with podcasting, like you can read a bunch of these tips on like how to, do great podcast interviews. And it's like, it's so dependent on the guest and the context. It's like sometimes you can play devil's advocate and like you get a fighter who wants to like have a debate. Sometimes you that'll shut the person down entirely and you have to be self-deprecating, but you start to learn the nuance like as you go through. But I think everybody starts from that point of just like, reading down the checklist and like trying that stuff out. And it's about also being open as you go through like the multiple reps and the process and, figuring out when that works, when it doesn't, when you need to shift things up. And it's like only experience can kind of give you some of those lessons.
Just really concrete example, you gave devil's advocate through that as a phrase. I was just in a meeting where I was playing devil's advocate, and it's something that is a really powerful tool when it's the right time to use it, and is the absolute worst thing you could do when it's the wrong time to use it. So it's one of those things that you have in your toolkit where if you're in a room of people who are of roughly the same, I would say, like stature or like confidence level, and are not going to be like shut down by a debate, and are willing to like challenge and have an open discussion about things. And there's something that you feel like the room is not considering, even if you don't agree with it, you can bring it up and be like, I think we should at least talk about this thing, and I'm going to argue the pro case, even though I think it's stupid. I've done that like 4 times in the last 3 days for pricing related conversations, because they're hard conversations and you have to consider everything in them. And look at things from scratch, from first principles. Then if you're in a situation where someone is coming to you and they're very upset about something, that's the worst time to play devil's advocate, because you're not acknowledging the real problem. Because the real problem is not the situation. It's that they feel a particular way, and playing devil's advocate is not respecting that. So it's knowing the tools, it's being receptive to the situation, and it's, you pick up different little tools over time.
We're coming up in time, but I wanted to try to get maybe a concrete lesson. We've been talking a lot about career, your lessons learned. Your Substack is a great repository for lessons on more of the psychological and maybe softer side, less on like the content skills and all that. So I think that's a great resource. But I want to try to frame this question. So like, you've also seen a lot of content marketers, you've hired a lot, you've seen a lot early career, maybe like people ambitious, wanting to like make it to the next place. Where do you think what do you think is overrated from a content marketer's perspective in pursuit to grow their career? And what do you think is underrated?
Oh, wow. I mean, most of it is overrated almost by definition. If I'm going to say this is how you grow your career in content marketing, I think it's going to be 2 things. And it's going to be get really, really good at content marketing. And I have some takes on what that means. And then it's stop thinking about content marketing, are the 2 steps in order. So get really, really good at content marketing. The thing that is so powerful about content is that you can own the message. You can be the person that communicates the most important things about the business, the product, to the customer. You can be someone who understands what people really need. And if you are getting reps at making things incredibly compelling. Like I just gave this advice to someone the other day. If you're looking at content, you got to think headline, intro, subhead, first line of the each section. Like you got to pull people through the page. You got to be thinking about curiosity loops. You got to be thinking about scanners. You have to think about like if you pull in some copywriting, you got to think about agitation, right? You got to really poke the bear, pull in customer language. If you can do those things, you're going to be able to create things that people read. Can you also create things people search for? It's useful to have that skill set also. I learned it by studying Bill Slawski's stuff and then going through Google patents. You don't have to do that. I think that's increasingly not the only skill set that's required in content marketing, although, we both have some SEO background. So maybe that's sacrilege, but get really good at it, and not in a surface level way. Like I used to write 100 headlines a day. I did that for 30 days before I cut it down to 30 headlines a day because I was going insane. I used to go find copy just in places on the internet and rewrite it, and then rewrite it again. I would take freelance work if I thought the freelance work was in an area that I specifically wanted to improve. I would reach out to nonprofits, and because they always have terrible websites, and I would say, hey, I rewrote your website. Use it, don't use it, I don't care. It's free. And if you want to talk more, we can talk more. You have to like take this combination of a lesson or academic reading material and the execution of that material, and you combine them. Okay, I'm going to read about headline templates, and I'm going to go write 100 headlines. I'm going to read whatever old copywriting book, and then I'm going to go rewrite some copy. I am going to experiment with different forms of writing and a more journalistic type thing, I want to write listicles that are good. You have to be really digging into getting better at the craft of content marketing. And then you have to forget content marketing and think about what the challenge is for the business, which is hard to do. It's hard to spend a lot of time getting really good at something and then step away from it and focus on what the growth lever is. But I think content is so cool because, again, it is about that message and holding attention. And if you can figure out how to hold attention and deliver a message someone cares about, all marketing benefits from that. It's a generalizable skill. And if you then take that over to whatever it is for your business, whether that's a freemium motion or helping your sales team communicate that message differently, you're going to be able to have an impact with it. Those are the two things that I would think about. Get incredibly good at your craft and run towards the hard problems that are going to create an impact. And then read my blog for all the other stuff.
That was good. There's got to be, I love the idea of like a paradox that speaks more truth. It's like learn content, forget content. It's like Buddhist, like love without attachment or something where it's like it's hard to reconcile the two, but then eventually when it clicks, you're like, oh, makes total sense. There should be like a French word for that, paradox that speaks truth. So that was useful. Thank you very much. The hardest part of this conversation is not stretching it out to 3 hours. So I'm going to have to get you back on because there's a lot I didn't ask you about. But we're at time. So can you tell the audience where they can find you online?
Yeah, you can see me on, is it sacrilege to say Twitter now? But I'm at Benyamin Elias on Twitter. You can follow my Substack, diamondpencils.substack.com. Diamond pencils because a hard pencil is useless and it's all about soft skills. Those are the two places. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a message there as well. And I am always happy to chat. I'm always happy to talk to smart marketers.
I love it. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.